Thank you. It's a pleasure to be back here. I attended the last IPA conference here at Hyderabad too. And since the COVID struck, this is my first conference attendance, uh, at least in the face-to-face mode. So good to be in the same room with scholars and researchers. The mood for this conference was well set by the inaugural session. What I have here today to present before you is something related to what we were discussing in the morning inaugural session, which is contemporary developments within capitalism. Now, I realized when I was sitting there that my use of the word food delivery industry might create some confusion. So let me just begin by clarifying it at the outset, that when I talk about food delivery industry, what I'm talking about are app-based platforms for food delivery. The ones we are familiar with, Swiggy, Zomato, and others like that in India. So that's what we are talking about here. Platforms, which are a new development in contemporary capitalism. Some have gone to the extent of calling it platform capitalism. Some may not want to go that far, but definitely consider this as a very new kind of arrangement of labor, organization of work, and new model involving new modalities of control over labor and new modes of resistance, labor resistance to such control that need to be imagined. So much is at stake here. The gig economy, it's part of the gig economy. And regulation-wise, it's a nightmare in all countries. But for labor, increasingly, this is the one area where they are finding themselves more and more when they're seeking livelihoods, both in the developed and in the developing countries. And the conditions in which they find themselves in are not what they were taught or to expect as a future for adult labor when people grew up. So our imagination of adult labor as an adult worker is that of stable or more or less stable work based on explicit employment contracts with more or less benefits, where we are recognized as all workers or employees of a particular firm. And then there are laws of the land. Different countries have different laws which govern that contract. All of that is gone with this platform labor. Okay, so that is what we are trying to understand. Now, it might appear strange that when we're talking about essentially an arrangement of work without an employer-employee relationship, legally and in reality also, then why do we have the other terms? Work games, labor process, and labor supply. All of these are terms that are part of the broader Marxian literature, whether it's the industrial sociology part of it or the political economy part of it. These are all there, right? So why are we talking about using these in the title when we are talking about a completely different arrangement of work in the context of which this shouldn't arise? This actually arose in the context of 20th century development of capitalism. The Fordist factory, the stable contract, the laws, and so on. So that is the main point that we'll try to argue here, that there's much to be gleaned from that literature. And there's much that is new in this new arrangement of work, but there's much that is old. Old in the sense of not only old as in 20th century old, but maybe 19th or 18th century old. And that's why we have gone back and looked at the literature and found much that is relevant to here. So this work is my work with Ujjwal. Ujjwal is a PhD student in our department, almost to the point of completing his dissertation. So he did a wonderful work, an ethnographic work. Though broadly his framework is political economy, but he did ethnographic work, signed up as a delivery boy in one of the companies, and then based on the experience, that was his qualitative work, he wrote his thesis. Now, what we're going to use only some findings just for illustrative purposes, but this work is a spin-off in the sense that after most of the dissertation is done, we realize that there are theoretical possibilities which we are now exploring. And so this is a work in progress, and I'd be much grateful if you can offer me your comments, criticisms, and so on. This will be useful for both of us. I'm trying to do that. Okay. So, what's the motivation behind this paper? What's new, what's old? Platform capitalism. Now, there have been lots of changes, major transformations in global capitalism. Some of them have been already mentioned in the inaugural session. We talked about financialization of the world economy in the first session, major references to that. We know about the digitalization, the process of digitalization that is changing the workplace everywhere. Now, what are the implications for this? For the standard labor capital relationship that that was the hallmark of the 20th century capitalism. If we remember, if you go back to the financialization literature, which is about 20-30 years old, then what the financial literature is basically essentially said is that the manager, or the discrete role of the manager, is vanishing, right? The principal agent problem, the shareholder value is the dominant objective. Therefore, what's there for the managers? The managers are only going to work to maximize shareholder value. So the managerial agency was being eroded through the financialization of the capitalism. Digitalization led similarly to decimation of the workers. Apparently, decimation of the workers. In what sense? First of all, automation. There are factories, there are departmental stores where if you watch videos, you won't find any worker, hardly any worker on the shop floor, but automobiles are being manufactured. Goods are being moved around in the departmental store, not a single worker, right? That sort of automation is going on. But in this case, when you come to platform capitalism, or if we don't want to talk about platform capitalism, but at least the platform companies, they even vanish from the contract. Nothing is written there. They are not workers, they are partners, they are independent contractors, right? Some may say they are entrepreneurs, but they are not workers. Those who are driving for Uber or Ola or these delivery boys, they are not workers, right? And that's the legal contention. So in a sense, just as the traditional manager lost their valorized position, so did the worker. The manager and the worker both seem to have sort of vanished. Forget the old factory, the automated factory, and the manager and the worker. That seems to be no longer happening. That is the idea that seems to dominate much of the discussion on this. As labor platforms emerged as significant modes of organizing work with labor that has to be made available on demand for specific clients, sometimes for specific tasks, as for example in the Amazon Mechanical Turk or Upwork or similar such microtasking platforms, you need a particular work done, the client logs on, the worker logs on, and the platform connects. That specific task could be even quoted in terms of cents, not even dollars. It could be such a small micro task, right? As these platforms emerge, what happens to control over labor? Does it vanish? Does it vanish? It's just the meeting place from the two sides, the clients and the workers. It turns out that is not what's happening, because this meeting is not just facilitating a platform for meeting. It is also the platform is also the place where the certain performance of labor takes place, and hence there is control mechanisms put in place. Now, these control mechanisms for many of these app-based platforms are typically algorithmic controls. So who has replaced the traditional manager? The algorithm as the manager. Algorithmic management is the invisibilization of management, but nevertheless a powerful management. To the point that some say this is the panopticon. The worker is under surveillance all the time. GPS tracks the worker. Every movement has to be reported. You have to click photos at every step and so on. So the traditional managerial control has not vanished. It's just that it has been replaced by algorithms. But is that the case? That's what Ujjwal worked on. What happened to labor supply and labor resistance? Does it mean just because we have a growing labor reserve, which again we referred to in the first half inaugural session, and that is true. Marx used the word in Grundrisse, relative surplus population. Very powerful term. Worldwide, any basic statistics and you look, you'll find that the relative surplus population is increasing in both developed and developing countries. At some point, we need to stop talking about this distinction, developed and developing, because there is no distinction any longer. America, in terms of the structure of the economy, looks as much as India or any other developing country. They have the same small percentage of people with secure jobs and high incomes, and 80 to 90% with insecure jobs and low pay. I'm referring to the Peter Temin's book, The Vanishing Middle Class, where he basically gave these numbers, 20 and 80. Now, remember, we talk about India, 10% formal sector, 90% informal sector. More or less, we are reaching the same percentages. But in any case, in both countries, the relative surplus population is growing. Does that mean that labor supply is automatic? That people will just come on the platform and perform the labor, right? We don't need any control mechanism, right? It turns out, and there will be no labor resistance, right? Because control implies resistance. Does it mean that there will be no resistance? Again, it turns out that is not the case, right? So these are the things. That we briefly will touch upon. Now, as I said, So Ujjwal did this work in several phases. He did a pilot study of 15 days in Calcutta, then worked as a delivery work in Dharamshala, then talked to many management workers in Delhi, NCR, and then essentially he used a semi-covert kind of ethnographic work and so on. So we're going to use some of the quotes, some of the findings from those interviews. Not mainly, will not go mainly by that. The focus here is on the theoretical framework. How do the platforms activate labor effort and maintain labor supply without a formal employment relationship? Because there is no compulsion here. Unlike a contract based on which you can take the laborer to the court or the laborer can take the employer to the court, there is no contract here, right? And the self-representation of these platforms are that this is the space of freedom and autonomy of the worker. You can join in whenever you want. You can log out whenever you want. Whatever hours you choose, that's the self-representation of these platforms. So in that kind of organization, how do actually platforms activate labor effort? How do they match? New Year's Eve or Diwali or 7 p.m. to 11 p.m. dinner time. How do they actually match, right? And that's where we started looking at if there are things that we can glean from the existing literature that were developed actually in a completely different context. As I said, in the Fordist context, right? Industrial sociology, labor process theory, I'm talking of Harry Beverman and all the other work that Michael Buraway and work on manufacturing consent and so on. These were all earlier works. And then we tried to find out, what is it that's similar, what can we take and what we need to, rethink. In the literature, there have been discussions on similarities. Apparently, this is a very new, sophisticated development, this platform labor. But people have said that this arrangement, in essence, is nothing but putting out, which used to happen in 18th, 19th, 17th century, 17th, 18th mostly, right, in the European context. People have pointed out that the platforms play a mercantile role. Much like the merchants played in the earlier period, the dominant role that the merchants played in the earlier period, connecting independent artisans or independent workers or producers with the distant market. That's all. Someone is sitting in USA, you have some skills, you have just been connected. Freelancing. There are similarities too, because in many cases the workers here, they are not workers. Remember, they are partners or contractors, independent contractors. They own often most of them, they own the means of production, the bike or the cycle or whatever, the computer, whatever they need. And they often have nominally, formally, they have the freedom to set their schedule of work, which is again something very different from industrial capitalism of the 20th century. These are the similarities that have been pointed out. Others have pointed out, no, there are other aspects of these labor platforms that actually make it look not like the typical mercantile arrangement, but in fact the industrial arrangement of 20th century. For example, this meeting of the clients and the workers, it's not that it's happening just anywhere randomly, or it's not just facilitated independent of the platform. It's a fenced off space where they are meeting. And that fencing off can be thought of as an industrial shop floor, specified place where specific social relations emerge. So it is not that different from industrial regime. Point of production is the platform in this case. And having that point of production, identifiable point of production, means that there will be processes of control, surveillance, and hence resistance by the workers. These are normal, right? Now, given this ambiguity in understanding, there's much that's going on here, right? How do we look at this gig economy? Is it so different? Is it something absolutely new? For example, we know that they are paid they are paid piece rate wages. So a delivery boy delivers a certain order, gets a certain amount, piece rate payment system. Is that so novel? So when you read again Michael Burawe's book Manufacturing Consent, he was working in USA in 1974 in a factory which was a machine parts producing factory, agricultural machinery, long established, in fact, which has existed for several decades. There also the same piece rate system existed. So piece rate is not that uncommon in the 20th century. In fact, if you think of universities, particularly private universities here and in USA in many cases, what do many of the faculty do? They do gigs, teach one course, get paid for that, or maybe get paid per session. We do that all the time at our institution. What are those? So in terms of these characteristics, the gig economy is not that novel that we can't actually reach out to the early literature and not bring out the elements. Again, is control specific to industrial capital? What about Walmart? What about big departmental stores? The workers continuously, there's surveillance and so on. If we look at it if you don't get blinded by the novelty or the digital, aspect of it, then essentially it boils down to the same problem, the labor indeterminacy problem. Labor power essentially is bought. That's a commodity, capacity to work. And then the employer must consume that labor power and elicit and bring and extract that labor, performance of labor. That is the main thing. How do you extract the performance of labor? By buying labor power through a contract doesn't mean that you are guaranteed the amount of work that you want to do. But if this is the angle from which you approach, then it starts making sense. There are commonalities, there are differences. What are the commonalities? Work effort. Same on the Ford factory, same here. For example, this is one quote. Once I've delivered the last required order, the minimum that I had to do, that is one delivery boy saying, I just do not check the box delivered. They just don't click it, right? But they keep logged in and don't take any other orders. So here's the issue: the worker actually is not, providing the effort, and there's a managerial problem. How to make the worker? How to catch the cheating, the shirking? Same problem, right? Labor allocation. Just as there is peak time and you have to allocate labor to hot jobs, quote unquote, similarly, you have to spatially and temporarily allocate it. Dharamshala is one thing, McLeod Garden is another thing. It's steep. Workers won't go. What do? Right? The trip is to steep road. Temporal, as I said, New Year's Eve or peak dinner time, how do you make them? So you have to come up with different mechanisms, nudges, threats, rewards, incentives. None of these are very new. However, what is new is the mode of gamification. The gamification of the whole, communications. Thirdly, labor mobility. It's not just the worker has to log in at a particular point of time during dinner time. The worker may just leave anytime. That happens all the time. Today, one is on Uber or Ola. Tomorrow, they are leaving, going to Zomato, working for 2 days, then leaving. How do you manage the regular supply of worker? Just appealing to the, just assuming that because there is a large reserve of labor does not solve the problem. There has to be explicit mechanisms, and therefore they have explicit mechanisms like regulated oversupply. There is a certain surplus that they hire, but up to a certain point, so the workers' earnings don't go down. Because if you hire too many workers, they will compete and their earnings will go down and they will leave. So it's a calculation that they have to do. They have to tie up with third-party logistics in case workers strike. Third-party logistics firms will supply the workers. They give they involve the workers in relations where they are given means of production, delivery box on the bike, through a rental arrangement for which the worker have to pay the rent monthly, right? So tied up in rental arrangements or debt bondage. So you are given a loan to buy a bike, now you have to pay it back, right? So there are various mechanisms which they employ in order to get the laborers. One of the big things that they want to avoid, and this is a recurring problem, by the way, maybe not in a big city like Delhi, where there are always lots of delivery boys are available, but in smaller places, shutdown problem. There are no delivery boys. You can't. This is from Ujjwal's WhatsApp, the app, 9 o'clock, peak time, no delivery boys there. You see all these are are basically off. That's what they want to avoid. So they have all these mechanisms, which I'm not going into because of the limitation of time, pay system, elaborate pay system and reward system to which they get it. And therefore, they need a fleet manager, not all algorithms. This is the job ad for fleet manager. What will your typical day look like? And you will see many things. Managing delivery partner fleet within the assigned clusters, closely track delivery partner logins, and ensure supply availability and positioning as per the demand projections. It's not all algorithmic. So this whole projection, the managerial role is vanished and it's all algorithms now. That's not true. Fleet managers play a very important role, including threats, nudges, etc. I'm just now. Last point, and I am sorry I've run out of time. Where does work games come in? The Burawe's celebrated book, Manufacturing Consent, which is based on a study of a factory, where management set a daily quota for workers, but otherwise left them unsupervised. What Burawe found was that the workers developed from the bottom a sort of games, where what they try to do is to meet the quota, but also get the rewards, the incentive, the bonus, and so on. And to cut the long story short, because it's a wonderful book, what Burawe said that factories don't operate solely by coercion. And he invoked Gramsci and quoted Gramsci that hegemony starts in the shop floor. So Burabe said that, look, they are actually getting into the work game themselves. And this is not the managerial logic. They are developing the work game, right? So first there's the learning game when the new worker learns. Then there's the reward game. After you have learned the skill, then you start playing the game for different kinds of benefits within the organization and so on. The end result was a system that produced both immediate effect and long-term commitment to the 4D firm. So the question Buddha was asking was not why the workers are working so hard when there is someone in the top floor ripping them off. The question is that why the workers are not working harder. He was asking why they are working so hard. The thing is that this playing out the work games, this is internalized games which the workers play. Now it will be surprising when we found the similarity between what Buddha wrote in the context of a Fordist manufacturing plant in 1974 in USA and what delivery boys do. Buddha talks about, for example, in the morning when someone walks into, the first question the one worker says to the other is, are you making out? Because that's the term that they use, making out on the shop floor, meaning you are gaming the whole thing, right? Followed by what's the rate, right? Similarly, food delivery program partners platform, in the morning they greet each other. How many orders did you hit yesterday? When do you return home? How many orders have you completed? So you can see that in a sense this is where the games begin to take over the conversation. And to the extent that this is a very interesting quote. My wife tells me to come home to eat, but then I have another customer in the line and I can't stop working. I see it as a video game, and you see the rides as coin symbols. By the way, Uber has admitted that they have actually modeled their app on a video game. So it appears as a video game, right? However, not all games. So in a sense, what's happening is that work deprivations are converted into relative satisfactions. This is the term from old industrial sociology. Anyway, this is not where we are departing from Buddha ways, that this is not entirely consent. That was also the criticism of Buddha ways work. We are saying that games are being played both for and against managers. For example, as I showed, they literally game the game. They install fake GPS. Workers learn how to teach the algorithm to give higher rates, all sorts of things. So they also game the system, including collective action against servicing certain localities. So there are both collective action that takes place, the kind of labor resistance that we're familiar with, but also micro resistances, which are referred to workers' fiddles, which is micro resistances like the ones that I mentioned. This is, by the way, very, very prevalent. I recently read somewhere there was a survey where almost 30% of the food delivery workers actually at one time or another eat something out of the food that they're supposed to deliver. That is across the world. So these micro resistances happen all the time. So I'll stop here because I've run out of time. But essentially, what we're proposing is that while accepting novelty of it, there is much that one can glean from the earlier literature and rethink this problem. Thank you.